If you look at the Kishkinda Kand of the Valmiki Ramayana, there are mentions of the Pandyas and the Cholas and the Cheras. Today we are taught to see ourselves as either North Indian or South Indian, and the two don't mix.
Instead of spending money on the temple, why can't you spend money on? Of course, the kings were not that dumb. So why did they invest that much money and energy in the temples?
Education system that we have today, it is designed to produce clerks and peons, not leaders. It's designed to keep India enslaved. The ancestral homeland of almost all non-African humans was India. So our heritage, genetic lineages, all of us, it's about 70,000 years old. Near Puducherry, they have discovered a very ancient submerged city, which seems to be roughly 100 square kilometers at least. That's how large the site is. It seems to be 10 or 11,000 years old, and it is tentatively identified as Kaveri Pumbadu. And the people would typically live in reasonable poverty. But the kings would live in great opulence. Temples, universities, we don't remember the great universities of India. We had universities across the length and the breadth of the country. In south, north, east, west, everywhere. India is the birthplace of the university system.
Yeah.
Okay? None of them stands today because the Turks destroyed everything. During British times, the British themselves collected data. Before they destroyed India's education system, they collected data about India's education system. The records are still there with the British. And if you look at the data, the British data, which the British collected, in temples, children of every caste were given education, and boys as well as girls were given education, and typically the so-called lower castes had more students than the so-called higher
This
castes.
can't be real.
There is the city of Dwarka. There is a town of Dwarka in Gujarat. About 20 or 30 years ago, the archaeologist Dr. S.R. Rao said, let me look under the water what's off the coast of Dwarka. And he found an entire city there.
Oh my
So
god.
clearly what was written in the Mahabharata actually happened.
See, when we talk about the kings and queens, I remember one more thing. The earliest form of history I studied was the Indus Valley civilization. But as we were discussing earlier, you mentioned that history dates back to 11,000 years back. Can you shed some light on that part? Like, what were the actual conditions at that time? Like,
Right. So if we look at Sangam literature.
yeah.
So when we talk about Sangam literature, we talk about Tamil literature. So the first, there have been 3 Sangam periods.
Yes.
The first Sangam, the first such event is supposed to have happened in a city called Kapatapuram. That city no longer exists. And if you date it back, it's about 11,000 years before today. Okay, and it is said that Lord Shiva himself participated in the first Sangam. All the gods participated. Now this city, Kapatapuram, no longer exists because 11,000 years ago, the coastline of India was very different. The ice age was still, to a significant extent, still in force, and the sea levels, ocean levels were at least 100 meters below where they are today. So we had more land, and the coastal cities of that time are now submerged. Recently, near Puducherry, they have discovered a very ancient submerged city, which seems to be roughly 100 square kilometers at least. That's how large the site is. It seems to be 10 or 11,000 years old, and it is tentatively identified as Kaveri Pumbadu.
I know.
So we have discovered one such city. There are many more submerged cities on both coasts of India, east coast and west coast. So Kapatapuram once was above the sea level, now it is gone, but that's where the first Sangam was held, approximately 11,000 years before today. So that's a very old age, that's a very long time ago, and still the memory is there. But we don't have the literature from that time, for whatever reason. Now, when it comes to, you spoke about the Indus Valley civilization, we have to understand one thing. It was not a separate civilization that came and disappeared. We are part of it. We are the continuation of that.
Exactly.
It was actually the Saraswati Sindhu phase of India's history. And it was not something that happened far away in the northwest of India. India today, if you look at India, it is all interconnected.
Yes, exactly.
India has always been interconnected. It has always been one subcontinent. If you look at Sangam literature, there are mentions of the lands north of the Himalayas. If you look at the Kishkinda Kand of the Valmiki Ramayana, there are mentions of the Pandyas and the Cholas and the Cheras, and the Andhras and the Pundras. So it's not like everybody was living in isolation. We have always been one civilization. So when we talk about the Saraswati Sindhu phase of Indian history, which your history textbooks will call the Indus Valley civilization, it begins the oldest archaeological site that is said to be of this era is called Bhirrana. It's in Haryana. It's about 9,500 years old. And there are at least 3,000 archaeological sites along the dry riverbed of the Saraswati that have never been explored. So it is quite likely if we start exploring them, we will find much older sites. But from the best evidence that we have today, the Saraswati Sindhu phase of India's history started around 9,500 years before today. And what is remarkable is that we have unbroken cultural continuity. So ladies, even today in India, they wear the Mang Mein Sindoor, the thing, right?
Sindhu, yeah.
Sindoor in the hair.
Even in Tamil Nadu, we have
Everywhere in India.
Yeah.
If you go to Assam, they wear it. In Tamil Nadu, they wear it. In Kerala, they wear it. In Haryana, they wear it. 1,000 years ago in Afghanistan, they used to wear it. So we have this culture, this cultural manifestation today in India. If you see statues of ladies from the Saraswati Sindhu phase, you see the same thing,
Yeah.
right?
Yes,
So
exactly.
the same culture existed. So and that's just one example. We have Shivalingas, we have the Swastika, we have the Trishul, we have Pashupati Shiva.
Yes.
We have so many, we have Jallikattu.
Exactly.
Yeah, Jallikattu.
Imagine in Tamil Nadu.
So we have elements of what is today considered to be Southern Indian culture. We have elements of what is considered to be Northern Indian culture. We have yoga. We have statuettes of people in all the yoga positions that we still practice today. It's at least 5,000 years old, minimum.
But imagine, yoga is such an advanced technology. It's so deep, but it's not seen in a perspective that people, 5,000 years old, they knew this technology that it literally changes your entire body. You can take control over your entire body through yoga, and people in India 5,000 years back knew about this. But we were never taught the Indus Valley civilization this way. All we read was like how the drainage system was, how the great bath was. Of course, it was great, but I'm sure that's the least thing they must have, cared about. There are some extra elements, there are supernatural elements that not even be considered like yoga. It was not emphasized. It was not even in schools. It was. I think yoga is something that should be the pride of our country, but it's not yet. People hardly, we have a lot of misconception about yoga. But why do you think it's happening? Like,
Why is it happening? It's because the education system that we have today is essentially the unchanged education system that was instituted in the 19th century by Lord Macaulay. So today they will offer you MBA degrees, they will teach you computer science and God knows what. But the education system is just the same. It's designed to tell you what to think and not teach you how to think. It is designed to produce clerks and peons, not leaders. It's designed to keep India enslaved. And after 1947, we did not change the system.
so do you really think there wasn't any significant changes from the system Macaulay made? There wasn't any significant changes even after 75 years of independence?
Well, they offer modern degrees.
Okay.
So it looks very different. It looks very modern. It looks 21st century. But the way it is done is the same. See, what does a teacher value in a student today?
Marks.
No. Marks
Obedience,
show.
obedience, of course.
Obedience.
Of course. I'm
You
sorry.
are a good student if you
Yeah,
are obedient.
yeah.
But a truly creative and individualistic student. See, we have to all be part of society, but we have to flower as individuals. Every child has so much curiosity. It is smashed out of them through obedience. So they value students who are obedient. They don't value students who think differently or ask questions.
Exactly.
If you ask questions, you are bad.
Yes, exactly. Because I was always a good student all my life. I'll be the topper of the class. But I was not so obedient. I'll ask a lot of questions. I was never a favorite child of any teacher. I would always, even since from I ever remember, I would always have some kind of conflict with the teacher. There'll always be some distress between the teacher and me. So even though I was a good student, I'll be good at marks. I was never considered a good girl or something like good girl of an example or never like that. But there'll be other girls who'll be, who'll be good in marks, but at the same time they'll be super obedient. But those girls will be portrayed as an example for the rest of the people. So of course, yeah, it's true. Obedience is something.
Listen, what is the sign of intelligence? Curiosity.
Curiosity.
And how does curiosity manifest itself? Asking questions. But you're not supposed to ask questions. So they're destroying your curiosity and they're turning you into an obedient robot. So you can get marks in the Indian education system by simply memorizing some things you don't understand.
Exactly.
But if you don't understand, after the year is over, you will have no memory of what happened and you will have learned nothing. You simply memorized some stuff and you wrote down the answers in the exam, and then next year you move on and you will remember nothing. So what was the point of that 1 year that you wasted? Nothing. That is the Indian education system. Nothing has changed. So that's the system that we are all laboring under. And they want to detach and separate Indian children from their heritage and culture. So we are not taught about yoga. We don't even know what yoga is and where it came from. These statuettes that we have discovered in the Saraswati Sindhu archaeological sites, they are of people in a variety of yoga poses. Now, so many yoga poses, to develop them would take centuries, maybe thousands of years. It means that yoga is much older than what you see. We are already seeing the finished product 5,000 years ago.
Yes, exactly.
So the development phase would have taken 2,000-3,000 years, possibly.
For sure.
Right?
Yeah.
So it tells you how ancient yoga is. And it tells you where it came from. It came from the soil of India, the Indian subcontinent. We have discovered it in the Saraswati Sindhu region, Sapta Sindhu region. But who knows, it may have already also have existed in South India, Southern India or Eastern India. But our archaeologists have never bothered to look. So we don't know.
Exactly.
If you don't look, you will never know anything. That's what's happening. There is so much richness and depth in Indian history, and we perhaps know 2% of it. 2%, perhaps. So we had such an incredibly rich history. And today we are taught to see ourselves as either North Indian or South Indian, and the two don't mix. Well, that's a lie. We have always been one people. Yes, we have different skin colors. You have people who are fairer than me in South India also.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah. And there are people who are really dark skinned in North. Look at the Afghan cricket team. You will see people who are darker than the average Tamil Nadu person. Some people are like that.
Yeah.
So the skin color range and variation has been always part of Indian history because we have so much diversity in India. But culturally and civilizationally, we have always been one. This is something that I keep emphasizing, but people keep on pushing back because they have been taught something else. And they don't want to see the truth. It hurts to be given facts that clash with what you've been taught for decades as a child. So that's the problem. But the history of India, the history of the Indian civilization is at least 10,000 years old. And we have explored maybe 2% or 1% of the archaeological sites that exist. So if we start doing that archaeological work properly, imagine what we will uncover. The genetic history of India is 70,000 years old. The out of Africa migration is what most likely happened. So around 80 or 70,000 years before today, a bunch of humans, for whatever reason, we don't know why they left, but they escaped out of Africa. They made a very difficult journey through the Strait of Bab al-Mandeb near Yemen and Djibouti. They crossed over into the Arabian Peninsula. Then they went eastwards because that's where the vegetation was. Then they again crossed the Gulf of Hormuz, which is the Persian Gulf and the Arabian Sea region. And they came into what is now Persia. And again, they followed the greenery, vegetation, and then they made their way into the Indian subcontinent. The Indian subcontinent was filled with rivers. Rivers everywhere. Everywhere there's greenery. Huge geography. It can sustain as many people as you want. So the Indian subcontinent was the original founder's zone of the out of Africa migration. And out of India, you had migrations that eventually happened in all directions. And that's how the rest of the world was populated. Now, genetically, we know that the oldest non-African male and female lineages originated in the Indian subcontinent. There is something called haplogroup F, which is the ancestral genetic lineage of 95% of non-European men, non-African men. It originated in the Indian subcontinent about 16,000 years before today. And the oldest non-African female lineages are haplogroups M and N, which are about 65 or 70,000 years old. They also originated in the Indian subcontinent. So the ancestral homeland of almost all non-African humans was India. So our heritage, genetic lineages, all of us, it's about 70,000 years old. We are the oldest non-African, population group. And that's why we have so much diversity in India.
Yeah.
Because it's so old. So obviously, it's such a large subcontinent. So obviously, you will have lots of diversity. And you will have back and forth migrations. But the Indian subcontinent always had an enormous population compared to the rest of the world. For instance, when we look at the so-called mature phase of the Saraswati Sindhu phase of Indian history, the population of that region was greater than the population of maybe the entire rest of the world. And the geographical area was greater than Egypt and Mesopotamia put together. So that tells you, that gives you an idea of the scale and the size of that part of Indian civilization at the time. And the technology, you had cities laid out in grid structures. You don't have that in modern India, in 21st century India. Mm-hmm. But 5,000, 6,000 years ago, you had cities laid out in grid structures, like you have in the US today.
Yeah.
And you had drainage systems that were at that time better than what you have in many cities in India today.
Exactly.
Recently there were these floods in Pakistan a year or so ago.
Yeah, it was a huge one. No?
You know what came in the news? In Mohenjo-daro, everywhere it was flooded. In Mohenjo-daro, the 5,000-year-old drainage system drained out the water. It still works.
This can't be true.
Look at the news.
Oh my God. For real.
It still works. What our ancestors did 5,000 years ago.
Okay,
yeah?
I kind of underestimated the drainage system.
So, and you had standardization of weights and measures. So if you go to this enormous geographical region, so many towns and villages and big cities, the weights and measures you find everywhere are the same. Complete standardization across an enormous geographical region. Okay? The same sizes of weights and measures. Everything everywhere the same. Which means it was just one entire civilization. Maybe they were administered through different rulers or whatever. But the other thing is, not a single palace. So who was ruling? Who was administering this entire region?
Yeah, actually I had this question. We have the temple built by Rajaraja Cholan. It's so strong even today as if it was built yesterday. It's so strong, but we don't even have any trace of the palace or where he lived. We don't have anything. We have some forts here, but still forts can't be considered, I don't think, palace now.
A fort is a fortified military installation with soldiers inside.
Yeah. But
and perhaps some civilians, perhaps.
Yeah, we don't have any trace of palaces here in Tamil Nadu.
Yeah. Do we have palaces elsewhere? So this is a very interesting point you've raised. We have palaces in India belonging to the princely states era.
Okay.
Which is the Indian puppet kings who were under British rule.
Yeah.
They were forced to be under British rule even if they were good. But they had no choice. So from that period of time, we find palaces. Mysore Palace, other palaces, Baroda Palace, maybe some other places also. But if you go back before 1000 years before today, before 1000 AD, show me a single palace anywhere in India. Before the foreign invasions began. We had great empires, the Gupta Empire, the Chola Empire. The Chola Empire was one of the largest empires India has ever created. Where are the palaces of the Chola kings? Emperors, not kings, emperors.
Emperors.
Rajaraj Chola, Rajendra Chola, where are the palaces? temples still stand very strong.
Yeah.
Where are the palaces? Did they
Is
not?
there a possibility that they might have not built the palaces the way they?
That is shocking.
But
How can we even think such things? Look, we had great empires beyond Tamil Nadu. We had the great Gupta Empire. Huge. Their capital was initially Patliputra, Patna,
Yeah.
and then later, most likely, Mathura or somewhere else. Where's the palace? We had the Kushan Empire. Kanishka had an enormous empire stretching from the shores of the Caspian Sea to the Aral Sea to present-day Xinjiang and Tibet and much of India. He had a capital in Purushpur, which is now Peshawar, and another one in Mathura. Show me a palace. No palace. The Marathas had a fortress called Shaniwar Wada. It was a military installation. It was not a palace. We had the Maurya Empire, hugely powerful empire. Capital was Patliputra. We have ruins of Patliputra outside Patna. Show me the palace.
there wasn't.
There are no
wasn't
palaces.
even any trace of palace.
There were no palaces in ancient India.
Oh my
What
God.
this tells us is that kings and queens and rulers lived in reasonably humble abodes. They did not live in great luxury. Of course, there will be some standards to maintain because you receive foreign dignitaries, ambassadors. You cannot be living in a hut and receive an ambassador.
Of course.
But there were no palaces. One of the great queens of recent times was Ahilyabai Holkar,
Yeah.
who rebuilt so many of the destroyed temples that the Turks had destroyed. Much of Kashi was rebuilt by her.
Yeah.
Her house still exists. It is a very humble, ordinary house. It was not a palace. And she was one of the great queens of the past 500 years. And so on. So, we have examples of palaces in the past 500 or so years during British times and during Mughal times. During a time period when India was under foreign occupation. When Indian culture was impacted by all these things.
Then how about the Rajasthan that we have palaces there now?
That is in the past 1000 years only.
Yeah.
When India was already under siege from the outsiders.
Yes, yes, yes.
Okay, so things change around that time, and many of those palaces are also forts, like Amer Fort, Jaipur Fort. You had a certain amount of luxury in that, but typically they were fortresses. Chittorgarh Fortress. Many historians try to portray these fortresses and forts as palaces. Okay, but yeah, you would have some Rajput palaces for sure. But I am saying, look at the history of India beyond the past 1000 years, and then show me a single palace.
Before
You will
the
see
invasion.
temples everywhere. So if temples can stand that long, surely palaces will stand.
Of course,
But there are
of
no
course.
palaces. So what I'm trying to say is this. There was something called Raj Dharma, the duty of a king or a ruler. The duty was very simple. It is what Vishnugupta Chanakya wrote in the Arthashastra. The highest morality for a king or a ruler is that his country and his people prosper. That is the only job you have. One job. Your country should prosper, your people should prosper. You should not personally prosper. Your duty is to serve. Leadership is service. It is not ruling by force and gaining wealth for personal gain. I am not saying that all kings were good. We had the Nanda dynasty, which was defeated by Vishnugupta Chanakya and Chandragupta Maurya. The Nanda emperor, Dhanananda, was very evil. He amassed a lot of wealth for
Okay.
himself. He had a palace apparently, but he was defeated. So we also had some bad kings. I'm sure that the humanity is very diverse. In any,
Of course, exceptions are not
you will always have
examples.
exceptions. In any society, you will have maybe 0.2% criminals. You can't do anything
Yeah,
about it. Even in the best societies. So you will have exceptions, but the rule was that the king was a servant of the people, not an oppressor and a dictator and somebody who enjoys the people's wealth. The people's wealth was acquired by the king through taxation. It was used for public works. That's how it was typically and historically in India. And you gave the example of there is an absence of palaces. An economist called Angus Madison. He published a very highly regarded economic history of the world. And if you look at the statistics and data in there, it tells you that India in the past 2000 years, for at least 1500 years, has been the largest economy. Largest economy. At least 1/3 of the entire world's GDP came from India. So India has been historically the most prosperous and rich civilization in the world. China was typically number 2. So when you had an incredibly prosperous civilization, an entire subcontinent-sized civilization that was incredibly prosperous, then it tells you there was excess wealth.
Yeah.
And the true nature of a culture or a civilization is seen through how they use their excess wealth. If you look at European empires, all the excess wealth was amassed by the kings or the emperors. And the people would typically live in reasonable poverty. But the kings would live in great opulence. In India, all the excess wealth was typically used for public works. So you had great highways that were constructed which are now attributed to the Turks.
Yeah.
Sher Shah made the Grand Trunk Road. No, it was already existing in Mauryan times, the same road.
Even Cholas did. Even Cholas constructed highways.
Dakshinapath was there.
Yeah.
They would have maintained that. Temples, universities, we don't remember the great universities of India. We had universities across the length and the breadth of the country. In south, north, east, west, everywhere. India is the birthplace of the university system.
Yeah.
Okay? None of them stands today because the Turks destroyed everything and they burned all the libraries. So we had enormous universities. We had viharas and mahaviharas across the length and the breadth of the country. We had hospitals which were free for the people. You did not have to pay money to get treatment in a hospital. All of that has disappeared. We even had hospitals for animals and horses.
For real.
2,500 years ago, during Chandragupta time, we had hospitals along the highways for animals.
Oh my God.
Right? So it's always been that way. And the temples. So India had so much excess wealth that great temples were built. These temples were centers of education, not just worship, but also education. And this is something that spread across Southeast Asia also. Indonesia has similar great temples.
Exactly.
Angkor Wat in Cambodia.
Yeah.
So many examples. The same system. So temples were centers of education and people would donate their excess wealth to the temple so that it will serve the future generations. And also we have that. When we look at the Saraswati Sindhu phase of Indian history, we see that all the dwellings, all the houses were more or less the same. All were 2 or 3 storied, all had a flush toilet, all had a kitchen, all had a connection to a drainage system, all were more or less the same size, all of them had a fireplace. So all of these dwellings, all of these houses, they look very much the same. There is no large house and others are smaller. You don't see that. You see evidence of burials, people who are buried. You also see evidence of cremations, pots containing burned bones. You also see that. But you don't see certain burials that are superior in status and some that are done improperly or haphazardly. So if you look at the archaeological record of the Saraswati Sindhu phase of Indian history, several thousand years, you fail to decipher any disparity. Okay, you don't find it. Now, does it mean there was no discrimination? Maybe it doesn't mean that. Maybe certain people were more valued. For instance, I'm going back to a different time now. Vishnugupta Chanakya in Arthashastra said that entertainers should be highly taxed and kept away from general society. Because they should not be the role models of society. Entertainers should not be the role models.
Look at the world now.
Today is opposite of
India
that. So that is an example of discrimination, but maybe it is good discrimination. We have to understand that not all discrimination is bad. There is something called discernment. Will you marry the first guy who proposes you?
No.
Of course you will not marry the first guy who proposes you. You will have some standards.
Yeah, for sure.
Is that bad? It's good discrimination. You have the right to discriminate. You have the right to make your own choice and say no to whoever you don't like. Similarly, in society also there are choices. So Chanakya said, tax entertainers heavily, and keep them away from general society. Is that evil? I don't necessarily see that as evil. So there could have been such cases which are not visible in the archaeological record. When they die, they will be buried the same way. But in life, they were treated differently, perhaps. And in ancient India, we always valued knowledge more. Even today, we have that. A person who is very well-read is regarded with a special kind of respect. Even today, we have it, even though it is something which comes from old times.
So we have a saying in Tamil like "Kachorku chendra edapallam sivappu." Like the one who's knowledgeable, he'll be hailed wherever he goes. So
It's something that comes back from thousands of years. So we have always valued certain kinds of people more than others. Now, does that represent discrimination? If it does represent discrimination, it's not bad. You have something called merit in society. A person who gets 99 marks out of 100 is regarded in a certain way. A person who
sure,
gets 35 marks out of 100 is regarded in a very different
Yeah.
way. Is that bad discrimination? If that is bad discrimination, why do we have the Olympic Games? Why don't we give everybody a gold medal?
yeah.
Why do we have the Football World Cup, the Cricket World Cup? Let's give everybody a winner's medal. End of story. Nature is unequal. Society has always been unequal. It is the nature of
But
society.
where the question arises is the discrimination happens based on one's birth, not one's
So
capability.
that is a different story. That is a very different point. And that's actually a relevant point that you're raising. So we see no evidence of that.
Yeah, exactly.
We
Of
see no
course.
evidence of that in ancient India.
Even we have sages who born as a what we call a Shudra, whatever.
Yes.
We have sages. If of course,
Yes.
I don't really remember. Their
We
name
don't even
exactly.
know the the Chandragupta Maurya. What so-called class or caste did he belong to? We don't quite know. Maybe he was an orphan. Maybe he was the son of a single mother. We don't quite know who the father was. So he was a boy of obscure or unknown origins, and he was chosen by Vishnugupta Chanakya and made emperor because he had the qualities. It did not matter what his origin was. That's the kind of India we once used to have. We may not have that today, but yeah. So in the archaeological record, we don't see evidence of the discrimination that you rightly pointed out, which may exist in some places today and probably does exist. In ancient India, you see no evidence of that. So India has changed a lot in the past 1000 years. In the past 1000 years, Indian society was imposed upon by foreign occupiers who tried their best to destroy our culture and heritage. They tried their best. Look at northern India. Do you see any great temples standing there?
No.
Look at the thousands of statues of Buddha in northern India. Most of them, 98%, 99% will not have the head. Why? So they tried to destroy our culture and impose a foreign way of life on us. They have failed mostly, but that has imposed an enormous amount of stress and strain on Indian society. It has distorted Indian society. Indian society, when it was free, had evolved over thousands of years to function in a certain way. In the past 1000 years, it was not allowed to function in that way. So it had to cope in some ways. For instance, the foreigners, the Turks, when they came to India, they regarded women as pieces of meat. Okay? And Indian ladies, look at all the ancient temple carvings and sculptures. Indian ladies in those days wore less clothes than what they wear
course,
today.
yes, yes.
And that was a disaster for Indian ladies because they would be, what would happen to them? So Indian ladies, especially in northern India, had to start covering up.
Yeah.
It was out of necessity, but it became a tradition because they had no choice. And now it is part of culture.
Part of culture.
That is how culture gets distorted because of external forces. So a lot of bad things have crept into our society in the past 1000 years. We have to understand societal dynamics and how such changes happen and not blame ourselves for all the years that have come into society. Obviously, the whatever has gone wrong and whatever bad practices exist today have to be addressed. Everybody has to be treated the same. Everybody should be given the same opportunities regardless of gender, regardless of birth, regardless of anything. Then let them go as far as they can go. Some will go higher, some will go lower. There is life. But everybody should get the same opportunity. So that's what I believe. But ancient India was a very different story.
So when we talk about the ancient India, especially about you mentioned that 11,000 years back we
Yeah.
have, but I quite didn't know anything about that. The earliest form of history I know was the Indus Valley Civilization. So what are the findings that you know about the 11,000 years back history?
Right. So recently, off the coast of Tamil Nadu, near Puducherry, they discovered an ancient submerged city, roughly 100 meters below the sea level. Okay, it's approximately roughly 100 square kilometers in area. So it's a large city. And the last time that that part of the undersea region was above the water was about 10 or 11,000 years ago. Because we know at what time in the past the ocean levels were that low.
Yeah.
So that city, it was built to a large scale about 10 or 11,000 years ago. And a city is not built in 3 weeks. A city of that size is built over centuries.
Of course.
Okay, and that's in the east. That is possibly Kavarippumpatnam. In the west, there is the city of Dwarka. There is a town of Dwarka in Gujarat, and our mythology supposedly has told us that Lord Krishna used to rule over Dwarka, and Arjun, the warrior of Mahabharata, he had visited the city and he witnessed a horrible earthquake in which the city went into the ocean. It disappeared. So that is something they have always said was mythology. But about 20 or 30 years ago, somebody, the archaeologist Dr. S.R. Rao, said, let me look under the water what's off the coast of Dwarka. And he found an entire city there.
Oh my
So
God.
clearly what was written in the Mahabharata actually happened. Now, near Dwarka, in the Gulf of Khambat, you know, Gujarat has this neck, it's like a face in the neck of Gujarat. That region is called the Gulf of Khambat. There they have discovered an archaeological complex which is not one settlement but a network of cities, which is about 120 meters below the sea level, which corresponds to about between 9 and 12,000 years before today, when the sea was last below that. So, if we start looking, we will find such ancient submerged cities all along the coastline of India, because India is that old. Imagine a network of cities 11 to 12,000 years old was built, and it looks exactly the same as the big cities of Harappa and Mohenjo-daro. But it was 10 to 12,000 years old. So imagine how much time it would have taken to build cities of that scale of that sophistication. So clearly our civilization is way older than it is believed to be. So we have evidence. We have hard archaeological evidence. You know, you may not be able to carbon date anything from that region because we have not bothered to look there. But just the sea level tells you how old it is.
Yeah.
Because the last time the sea was below that was about 11,000 or 12,000 years before today. That itself tells the antiquity. And it looks, the layout of the cities looks exactly the same as the Saraswati Sindhu cities, which are above the sea level. So that tells you there is continuity. It's the same civilization which built those ancient cities and the newer ones. So all of this evidence tells us that our civilization from north to south, east to west, is at least 10, 12, maybe more 1,000 years old. We have the evidence. Isn't that interesting and fascinating?
Of course. It's like, it's a crazy thing. Of course, when you talk about the mythology and the history, usually many things, literatures in India are just discarded just as mythology, because we don't consider Rama, Krishna as historical figures. They were just mythological figures for us. But we have in Tamil Nadu, as I was told you in the morning, we have Silappatikaram, Manimekalai, so many literatures, like a number, countless number of literatures, which talks about the, lifestyle of the people of Sangam and all. But the only thing is, they'll have little supernatural elements, maybe at the end or something like that. But is it okay to just discard everything in the name of mythology?
See, very interesting point that you raised. When a story, let's say you have a group of 20 people in a circle.
Yeah.
And you whisper one sentence into the ear of one person, and the job of that person is to whisper the same sentence into the ear of the next person. After 20 rounds, when it comes back to the original person, the story will have changed. Completely.
Yeah.
So that is a human tendency. We tend to, over time, alter, embellish, magnify certain things. And many people over the generations tell the story over and over again. And each person adds a certain special element, maybe knowingly, maybe unknowingly. And after thousands of years, a person who was a great warrior may become a great god.
Yeah.
It doesn't mean the person did not exist, right? So, for instance, our historians always regarded the Mahabharata as mythology until they found Dwarka. Now, what can they do? We found an actual city exactly where the so-called mythology said it would be. So, it means it was not mythology, it actually happened. Similarly, once the ASI, Archaeological Survey of India, examines the Rama Setu region, we will know what the truth is. Let them do their work. I think the process is underway right now.
So it's been 75 years since we got independence.
Maybe roughly, yeah.
Yeah, it's okay.
Roughly, yeah.
Okay, so why is the archaeology department of India is not active as it should be? Because we are literally the oldest civilization in the world. We can vouch that. We can say that, I guess.
Undoubtedly.
Yeah. So shouldn't be the archaeological department more involved in finding the traces of the past as it should be? Because even we have in Tamil Nadu Keeladi, it
Yes.
kind of stopped, the archaeological works were kind of stopped in the middle. We found evidences that goes back to 2000 years back or something in the
It will be
Sangam
much
Age.
older if you look.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But it was stopped actually. The excavation was not completed. So why the archaeological department is not active as it should be?
Interesting question. Now, I have some theories, I have some facts, and let's see where it goes. The Archaeological Survey of India was created by our British occupiers. It was not created after independence. It is a British institution.
Okay.
It was created to examine and study the archaeological heritage of India. Now, if you go to London, there is something called the London Museum, the British Museum.
Full
It
of
is-
Indian-
It is a crime scene full
Yeah.
of stolen things. All these priceless artifacts, Indian artifacts, statues of gods, goddesses, all kinds of things, incredible things, they came from India. Who brought them? The ASI brought them. Before independence. Maybe after independence, I don't know. But before independence, the ASI's job was to go and survey all the ancient monuments and whatever was of great value, transport it to Britain. And you will find eventually it made its way even to the US and the entire Western world. So you have all kinds of museums, the Met Museum in New York, which has stolen artifacts from India.
Yeah.
The British Museum is a great example, and so many other museums. The ASI's job was to plunder India when it was under British rule. After independence, like every other institution in India, nothing changed. Now, I'm not saying that after independence they've been stealing monuments. I'm not saying any of that. But they still had the same colonial attitudes, this feeling of being foreign and superior to the regular Indians. And they always had this tendency to prioritize foreign occupiers' monuments like the Mughal
Yeah.
monuments and all that, and disregard Indian tombs, Indian monuments. There are so many examples in the media, in the news in the past 5 to 7 to 10 years of temples and monuments that are under ASI protection from which idols have been
Idols were
stolen.
theft.
And then we know where the idols turned up.
Yeah.
So I am not directly saying that the ASI has stolen the idols, but at least they
didn't care.
have been completely negligent
Yeah.
in carrying out the duties. So the ASI, I have said this in the past, ideally the government should shut down the ASI and create a new organization full of young professionals who actually care about archaeology. That's what I believe should happen. Will it happen or not? I don't know. If it happens, the credit should go to me. Because I'm the only one who's saying this.
That's actually a new perspective, to be honest, because what I thought is ASI is something, it was not funded enough, it was not given enough opportunities.
Interesting. Maybe there is a lack of funding. Even in ISRO, there is lack of funding. So maybe to some extent there is a lack of funding, which forces them to prioritize what they like. So then they will neglect all the ancient Indian monuments and prioritize Aurangzeb's tomb or whatever. And it's not like all ASI people are hopeless. They have produced some great archaeologists like S.R. Rao, like Dr. B. Bilal, one of the greatest archaeologists of all time. They have produced really good archaeologists also. But I would say, like all bureaucratic organizations, maybe 95% of them don't care. Maybe 5% are real gems.
That's
Possible.
sad. That's sad.
That's how India has always run for the past 75 years.
Because our history is dependent on us. Like, it's sad actually.
It is.
Yeah.
And when you have a monument which is exposed to the elements, and if you don't preserve it, if you don't do your work, then after 20, 30, 40, 50 years, it will be eroded and gone.
Yes.
So certain things are time sensitive. And if there is an apathy there, our history, our heritage is kind of lost, So you see a lot of that happening, a lot. And it's very unfortunate.
That's really sad.
It is, yeah.
So, as a final question, I know that Dwaraka has been found now. but I don't exactly know what are the things that, the details of the event. Can you shed some light on that part? Because of course, India celebrates Krishna. Like, if there's any evidence that could prove that he was a historical figure, not just mythological, character, that would be great, na?
Definitely, it would
Yeah.
be great. So I don't remember exactly when the submerged city was discovered. Maybe 1980s or 1990s, somewhere around that time. So the city was discovered. It was discovered to be very large, very well planned, like this the Indus Valley cities. They even did some dredging, rough dredging, and they got some pieces of wood and all that. They carbon dated one piece of wood to be more than 8,000 years old. Okay, but maybe is not conclusive evidence, but the depths of the city tells you where it was built. So it's very old, 8,000, 9,000 years old. We know that. So it's there. And there is an island called Beth Dwarka, which is still above the ocean, which is still above the water. Over there also there are very ancient structures, walls, and possibly the remains of larger buildings and all that. But once again, our archaeologists have kind of neglected that. So after Dwarka was discovered, almost no underwater archaeology has been done. It's just sitting there, lying there, and nobody is doing anything. Why they are not doing anything? I don't know. Should they be doing something? Of course, they should be sending divers and teams of divers and sonar mapping and all that. It can be mapped properly in the space of the next 3 to 5 years, maybe 10 years. So we will have a proper structure, a proper model of what the city looked like. But nothing is being done. This incredible discovery was made so many years ago. It's a priceless piece of our heritage, ancient heritage, and the ASI is doing absolutely nothing there. Recently, some foreign teams had come. I don't remember which show it was, but they came with some sophisticated equipment, sonar equipment, and they did some investigation there. But Indian archaeologists I'm sure there are some ASI archaeologists who are really interested, but as an institution overall, the ASI seems to be completely not uninterested in Dwarka. But so that's what we know. In the past 30 years, if our archaeologists had done their job properly, we would know a lot more about it. But unfortunately, we don't. But one thing is for sure, exactly what was written in the Mahabharata happened. The city is
Oh my
exactly
God.
where it is said, the Mahabharata text said it would be. So it is the city which lies down under the water. Its destruction was witnessed by Arjun, and most likely Lord Krishna had ruled over the city as king.
It's kind of giving me goosebumps.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.